The morning rush at Sunshine Café had finally died down, leaving only the soft clinking of coffee cups and the occasional scrape of forks against plates. Judy Hayes wiped her brow with the back of her hand and leaned against the counter for a moment's rest. She'd been on her feet since 5 that morning, and her ankles were beginning to protest. "You look like you could use this more than me," a gravelly voice said. Judy looked up to see Mr. Wilson sliding his untouched glass of water toward her. He sat in his usual spot, the third booth from the door, where the morning light wouldn't hit his eyes, but he could still see everyone who came and went. "Thanks, Mr. Wilson, but I'm fine," Judy said with a genuine smile. In her 3 years working at Sunshine Café, Thomas Wilson had become as much a fixture as the old jukebox in the corner. The 87-year-old Korean War veteran never missed his Tuesday and Thursday breakfasts, rain or shine. Sunshine Café wasn't anything fancy. The small diner sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, a town so tiny it barely registered on state maps. The linoleum floor had seen better days, and the red vinyl booths were patched in places with duct tape. But the food was good, honest cooking that reminded folks of home, and that was enough to keep the doors open. Judy grabbed the coffee pot and made her rounds, topping off cups with the rich, dark brew that was the cafe's one luxury. When she reached Mr. Wilson's table, she noticed how he was counting coins from his worn leather wallet, arranging them in neat little stacks. "Just the coffee today?" she asked, already knowing the answer. The last few weeks, Mr. Wilson had been ordering less and less. "That'll do me fine," he nodded, pushing exactly 1.75 toward her, the price of coffee plus a quarter tip that never changed, no matter what inflation did to the menu prices. Judy filled his cup and pretended not to notice how his hands trembled slightly. Thomas Wilson might be getting older, but his pride was as strong as ever. After his wife Dorothy passed away last winter, he'd started coming to the cafe more regularly. Judy suspected it was as much for the company as for the food. "How's that granddaughter of yours doing with her college applications?" Mr. Wilson asked, stirring a single packet of sugar into his coffee with careful precision. Judy brightened. "Rachel got her acceptance letter from state yesterday. Full scholarship for engineering. Never doubted it for a minute," he said, his weathered face crinkling into a smile. "Smart as a whip, that one. Reminds me of my Dorothy. Always had her nose in a book." The bell above the door jingled, and Judy glanced up to see a young couple enter. "Be right with you, folks," she called, then turned back to Mr. Wilson. "I'd better get back to it. You enjoy that coffee now." As she walked away, she heard him mutter, "Always do." Throughout the morning, Judy kept an eye on Mr. Wilson. He nursed that coffee for nearly an hour, occasionally gazing out the window at the busy street. When he thought no one was looking, he'd pull out a small photo from his wallet. Dorothy, Judy knew, though he'd never shown it to her. The lunch crowd started trickling in around 11. The cafe owner, Bill Parker, emerged from his office to help with the rush. Bill was a decent boss most days, fair with schedules and quick with paychecks. But lately, the pressure of rising food costs had made him snippy. His new assistant manager, Kevin Fletcher, was even worse, always watching the staff like they might pocket the silverware. "Table 6 needs their check," Kevin said as he passed Judy, not bothering to look up from his clipboard. "On it," Judy replied, keeping her tone pleasant despite the urge to roll her eyes. Kevin had been with Sunshine Café for only 2 months, but he'd already made himself unpopular with his by-the-book management style. When Mr. Wilson finally stood to leave, Judy noticed how he winced, one hand going to his lower back. The winter had been hard on his joints, he'd mentioned once, though he never complained outright. "See you Thursday, Mr. Wilson?" Judy asked, taking his empty cup. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, though something in his eyes made Judy wonder if he was telling the truth. As he headed for the door, moving slower than usual, Judy made a quick decision. She ducked into the kitchen where Hank, the cook, was flipping burgers. "Hank, can you throw together a breakfast sandwich real quick?"
"Egg and bacon on wheat?"
she asked. Hank raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. In 5 minutes, he handed her a wrapped sandwich, still warm. Judy hurried outside and caught Mr. Wilson just as he was unlocking his ancient Buick. "Mr. Wilson, you forgot your takeout," she called, holding out the sandwich. He turned, confusion clear on his face. "I didn't order any takeout, Judy." "Oh," she said, feigning surprise. "Well, Hank made an extra by mistake. We just have to throw it out anyway. Would be a shame to waste it." Mr. Wilson looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes sharp despite his age. They both knew there was no extra sandwich. After a pause that felt much longer than it was, he accepted the package with a slight nod. "Much obliged," he said quietly. "Dorothy always said I was too stubborn for my own good." "Sounds like a wise woman," Judy replied. "The wisest," he agreed, his voice thick with memory. That night, after her shift ended, Judy couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Wilson. She knew bits and pieces of his story from their conversations over the years. He'd fought in Korea, came home to marry his high school sweetheart, and worked for the railroad until retirement. They'd had one son who now lived in Arizona, too far to visit often. Dorothy had been the one who handled their finances, and since her passing, things had gotten tight. On Thursday morning, Judy arrived early to prep the dining room. When Mr. Wilson walked in at his usual time, 8:15 on the dot, she already had his coffee waiting. "Morning, Mr. Wilson," she greeted him. "Cold one today." "That it is," he agreed, unwinding the scarf from around his neck. His cheeks were red from the wind and he looked tired. Without asking, Judy brought him a menu, though he rarely looked at it anymore. "The special today is blueberry pancakes. Hank made the batter fresh this morning." Mr. Wilson hesitated, glancing at the price. "Think I'll stick with coffee today, Judy. Doctor says I should watch my sugar anyway." Judy nodded, not pushing the issue. But when she went on her break 30 minutes later, she asked Hank to prepare a small order of scrambled eggs and toast. No pancakes, respecting the sugar excuse. When she brought the plate to Mr. Wilson, he looked up in surprise. "I didn't order this," he said. "It's on me today," Judy told him quietly so the other customers wouldn't hear. "My treat for helping Rachel with her application essay. Your advice about writing from the heart? It worked." It wasn't entirely a lie. Mr. Wilson had given Rachel advice when she'd stopped by the cafe one afternoon. Though it had been months ago, for a moment, she thought he might refuse. His generation didn't take handouts easily. But hunger won out, and he gave her a small nod of thanks. This pattern continued for several weeks. Mr. Wilson would order coffee, and Judy would find some excuse to bring him a proper meal. Sometimes she paid for it herself. Other times she marked it as a mistake in the kitchen or an order that had been sent back. It wasn't strictly honest, but seeing the color return to Mr. Wilson's cheeks made any guilt she felt worthwhile. What Judy didn't know was that Kevin had become suspicious. The assistant manager had noticed the discrepancy between orders entered and food served at Mr. Wilson's table. One morning, while reorganizing the storage room, he'd positioned himself where he could see Mr. Wilson's booth and Judy's interactions with him. As winter deepened, Mr. Wilson's visits became the highlight of Judy's workdays. He would bring in old photographs sometimes. Dorothy in her Sunday best, their son's graduation, the small house they'd lived in for 40 years before downsizing to the apartment where he now lived alone. "You would have liked Dorothy," he told Judy one slow afternoon. "She never met a stranger. Could talk to anyone about anything." "Sounds like we would have gotten along just fine," Judy agreed, refilling his coffee without being asked. "She volunteered at the VA hospital every Wednesday," Mr. Wilson continued, his eyes distant with memory. "Said it was the least she could do after what we boys went through over there." Judy knew better than to ask about Korea directly. On the rare occasions when Mr. Wilson mentioned his service, it was always in passing, never in detail. The scars of war, she figured, weren't just the physical ones he carried on his left leg. "Your Dorothy sounds like a special lady," Judy said. "The best," he agreed. 47 years together, and I never once won an argument." He chuckled, the sound warming the quiet cafe. Little did Judy know that her simple acts of kindness were being documented. Kevin had been keeping a log noting dates, times, and estimated food costs. He was building a case, one that would soon change everything at Sunshine Café. But for now, in the peaceful lull of a Thursday morning, there was just Judy, Mr. Wilson, and the unspoken understanding between them that sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is to preserve their dignity while making sure they don't go hungry. And as Mr. Wilson sipped his coffee and gazed out at the snow beginning to fall, he felt, for the first time since Dorothy's passing, that he wasn't completely alone in the world. The first real cold snap of winter hit Millbrook hard. Temperatures dropped below freezing for days on end, turning the town into a landscape of ice-crusted snow and gray skies. Inside Sunshine Café, the ancient heating system wheezed and groaned, but managed to keep the chill at bay. Judy added an extra layer under her uniform and carried on. Tuesday morning came with no sign of Mr. Wilson. Judy found herself glancing at the door every time the bell jingled. But the third booth from the door remained empty. By closing time, she was genuinely worried. "Hey, Hank," she called through the kitchen window as she wiped down the counter. "You remember Mr. Wilson saying anything about going out of town?" Hank looked up from scrubbing the grill. "Not to me. Maybe the cold kept him home. Not good for old bones this weather." The thought didn't sit right with Judy. In 3 years, Mr. Wilson had never missed his Tuesday visit without mentioning it beforehand. When Thursday came and went with still no sign of him, Judy made a decision. After her shift ended, she bundled up in her heavy coat and drove to the Pineview Apartments where Mr. Wilson lived. She'd dropped him off once during a particularly bad rainstorm last spring, so she remembered the way. Pineview was a modest complex, 3 stories of faded brick with narrow balconies. Nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. The kind of place where people on fixed incomes could live with dignity. Judy checked the names by the buzzer until she found T. Wilson 2C. She pressed the button and waited. No response. She tried again, holding it longer this time. Just as she was about to give up, a crackly voice came through the speaker. "Hello? Mr. Wilson? It's Judy from Sunshine Café. Haven't seen you this week. Just wanted to check if everything's all right." There was a long pause, then a buzzing sound as the front door unlocked. Judy climbed the stairs to the second floor and found apartment 2C at the end of a long hallway. She knocked lightly. The door opened just enough for Mr. Wilson to peer out. Judy barely recognized him. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and he leaned heavily on a wooden cane she'd never seen before. "Mr. Wilson, are you okay?" "Just a touch of something," he said, his voice raspier than usual. "Doctor says it's a bad case of bronchitis. Nothing to fuss about." But Judy could see past his brave front. The apartment behind him was cold, she could see her breath, and there was an unwashed smell in the air as if he hadn't been able to care for himself properly. "Have you eaten today?" she asked. He waved dismissively. "Got some soup cans somewhere. May I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door wider. The apartment was small but tidy, though Judy noticed the stack of mail on the table, some of it marked with bold red final notice stamps. A photo of Dorothy watched over everything from its place of honor on the mantel. "Let me fix you something warm," Judy said, heading for the tiny kitchen without waiting for permission. The refrigerator held little more than condiments and a half-empty carton of milk that had gone sour. The pantry wasn't much better. A few cans of soup, some crackers, a jar of peanut butter. While Mr. Wilson settled into his armchair with a blanket, Judy heated soup and made toast. As she worked, she noticed the thermostat was set at just 60 degrees. "Your heat's awfully low," she commented, trying to sound casual. "Saves on the bill," he replied simply. When the food was ready, she brought it to him on a tray. He ate slowly but with obvious hunger. Judy sat across from him, filling the silence with cheerful updates about the cafe and town gossip. The Hendersons' dog got loose again yesterday, ran right through the diner, knocked over poor Mabel Johnson's walker. She wasn't hurt, mind you, just mad as a wet hen. Mr. Wilson chuckled, a sound that dissolved into a concerning cough. When he caught his breath, he looked embarrassed. "You didn't need to come check on me, Judy. I'm not your responsibility." "Neighbors look out for each other," she replied firmly. "That's what Dorothy would expect, isn't it?" At the mention of his late wife, Mr. Wilson's eyes softened. "She would have liked you." Before leaving, Judy discreetly turned up the thermostat and promised to return the next day with groceries. Mr. Wilson protested, but weakly. "Just until you're back on your feet," she insisted. That night, Judy couldn't sleep. The image of Mr. Wilson, proud but struggling, haunted her. She thought of her own grandfather, who'd died when she was in high school. He'd been a veteran too, though he rarely talked about it. What would have happened to him without family to care for him in his final years? The next morning, before her shift, Judy stopped at the grocery store. She used her staff discount at Sunshine Café to buy food that was about to reach its sell-by date. Perfectly good, just not fresh enough for the restaurant's standards. Bill let the staff take these items home for half price, a small perk of the job. For the next week, Judy visited Mr. Wilson daily, bringing food and checking that he was taking his medicine. His color improved gradually, and by the following Tuesday, he insisted on returning to his normal routine. "Can't spend the rest of my days hiding in this apartment," he declared, buttoning his coat with shaky fingers. "Need to get out, see people. Doctor says I'm on the mend." Judy drove him to the cafe, watching carefully as he made his way to his usual booth. He moved slower than before, but there was determination in every step. Kevin, the assistant manager, raised an eyebrow when he saw Mr. Wilson. "Thought we'd lost one of our regulars," he commented to Judy. "Not unkindly. Just under the weather," Judy replied, already pouring Mr. Wilson's coffee. When she brought him the menu, he studied it longer than usual, then closed it with a sigh. "Just toast today, I think. Still getting my appetite back." Judy nodded and put in the order, but when she went on break, she asked Hank to prepare a small bowl of chicken soup and a soft-boiled egg. Gentle foods for someone recovering. "Compliments of the house," she told Mr. Wilson when she set the food before him. "Doctor's orders, you need your strength back." This time, he didn't protest, just nodded gratefully and ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. The pattern continued. Mr. Wilson would order something small, coffee, toast, a cup of soup, and Judy would supplement it with extra food, always with some excuse about kitchen mistakes or house specials. Sometimes she paid from her own pocket. Other times she found creative ways to write it off in the system. What Judy didn't realize was that Kevin had grown increasingly suspicious. The assistant manager had been tasked with reducing food waste and tracking inventory more carefully, part of Bill's effort to keep the cafe profitable during the slow winter months. One evening, after closing, Kevin stayed late to review the security camera footage. The cafe had installed the system last year after a series of small thefts in the neighborhood. Kevin fast-forwarded through days of recordings focusing on Judy's interactions with Mr. Wilson. There it was, clear as day. Judy putting in an order for toast but delivering a full breakfast. Judy marking food as damaged in the system, then serving it perfectly intact to Mr. Wilson. Judy slipping her own employee meal onto his table when she thought no one was looking. Kevin sat back, a mixture of disappointment and vindication on his face. He'd suspected something wasn't right, and now he had proof. By his calculations, Judy had given away nearly $200 worth of food over the past month. In a small business with tight margins, it was no small amount. The next morning, Kevin arrived early and went straight to Bill's office, security footage in hand. Meanwhile, unaware of what was brewing, Judy greeted Mr. Wilson with her usual warmth. He looked better today, still thin, but the unhealthy pallor was gone from his cheeks. "How's the cough?" she asked, pouring his coffee. "Almost gone," he replied. "Thanks to you, I suspect." Judy waved away his gratitude. Just being neighborly. When she brought his usual toast, she noticed a small gift bag beside his coffee cup. "What's this?" she asked. "Just a little something," Mr. Wilson said, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Found it while cleaning out some boxes." Inside the bag was a delicate porcelain bluebird, hand-painted and perfect. "Dorothy collected them," Mr. Wilson explained. "Said they were good luck. Thought you might like this one." Judy's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, but I can't take something so precious." "Dorothy would want you to have it," he insisted. "You've been a true friend, Judy." The moment was interrupted by Kevin's voice. "Judy, Bill needs to see you in his office now." Something in his tone made Judy's stomach drop. She tucked the bluebird carefully into her apron pocket and headed toward the back, unaware that her simple acts of kindness were about to cost her dearly. Behind her, Mr. Wilson watched with concern, sensing the sudden tension but not understanding its source. The other customers continued their meals, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. Outside, the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the cafe floor. A brief moment of brightness before the storm. The walk to Bill's office seemed to take forever. Judy felt every eye in the kitchen on her as she passed, though the staff pretended to be busy with their tasks. Her mind raced, trying to figure out what this could be about. Had a customer complained? Was there a problem with her timesheet? Bill's office was barely bigger than a closet, tucked behind the kitchen. The walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings about the cafe's grand opening 15 years ago, photos of Bill shaking hands with the mayor and the restaurant's business license. The desk was cluttered with invoices and scheduling paperwork. Bill sat behind the desk, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Kevin stood in the corner, arms crossed, looking uncomfortable but determined. The security monitor on the wall showed the dining room, where Mr. Wilson sat alone at his booth, occasionally glancing toward the back of the restaurant. "Close the door, please," Bill said, his voice unnaturally formal. Judy did as she was asked, her heart hammering in her chest. In 3 years, she'd never been called into the office like this. "Do you know why you're here?" Bill asked, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on the desk. Judy shook her head, though a sinking feeling in her stomach told her this wasn't going to be good. Bill nodded to Kevin, who stepped forward with a tablet. "We've been reviewing the security footage," Kevin said, turning the screen toward her. "There's a pattern we need to discuss. The video showed Judy from 3 days ago, clearly serving Mr. Wilson a full breakfast while the register receipt in her hand showed an order for just coffee and toast. We have dozens of these," Kevin continued, swiping to show more clips. Going back weeks, Judy felt her face grow hot. "I can explain." "Theft is theft, Judy," Bill interrupted, his voice tired rather than angry. "I've always trusted my staff. That's why this is so disappointing." "It's not theft," Judy protested. "Mr. Wilson is struggling. His wife died. His pension barely covers rent and medicine. He's a veteran who served our country, and he was literally going hungry." "I was just giving away food that doesn't belong to you," Kevin finished. "Food that this business pays for. According to my calculations, you've given away nearly $200 worth of inventory." Judy looked from Kevin to Bill, hoping to see some understanding in their eyes. "I paid for some of it myself. The rest was mostly food that would have been thrown out anyway." "That's not your call to make," Bill said, leaning back in his chair. The ancient springs creaked under his weight. "We have policies about what happens to leftover food, and proper channels for discounts and comps. You know that?" "I'll pay it back," Judy offered quickly. "Every penny. I can set up a payment plan from my checks." Kevin shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but pressing on. "It's not just about the money. It's about trust, about following the rules. If we let you give away food whenever you feel like it, what's to stop the next person? Where does it end?" Judy felt tears threatening to spill but forced them back. She wouldn't cry here, not in front of them. So what happens now? Bill sighed heavily, the lines in his face deepening. He'd owned Sunshine Café for 15 years, working alongside his employees through good times and bad. He wasn't a cruel man, but business was business. The cafe had been struggling for months, margins getting thinner as food costs rose. "I don't have a choice, Judy. We have to let you go." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You're firing me? Overfeeding an old veteran who couldn't afford a decent meal?" "I'm terminating your employment for theft of company property," Bill corrected, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality that told Judy he'd practiced this speech. "Kevin has already prepared your final check minus the estimated cost of the unaccounted food." "You're docking my pay too?" Judy felt lightheaded, the small office suddenly seeming airless. Kevin handed her an envelope. "It's all itemized inside. Your last check minus $187.42. Judy took the envelope without looking at it. "What about my shifts this week?" "I'm scheduled through Saturday." "We'll cover them," Bill said, not meeting her eyes. "I need you to clean out your locker and return your name tag before you leave." Judy stood frozen, unable to fully process what was happening. 3 years of perfect attendance, of picking up extra shifts when others called in sick, of remembering every regular's order and making sure their coffee cups never went empty. All of it erased because she couldn't bear to watch a proud old man go hungry. "Can I at least say goodbye to everyone?" she asked, her voice small. Bill nodded, some of the stiffness leaving his shoulders. "Make it quick." "And Judy?" "I'm sorry it came to this." Judy walked out without responding. "Sorry didn't pay the rent. Sorry didn't make this right." In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment, taking deep breaths. Through the kitchen window, she could see Mr. Wilson still sitting in his booth, nursing his coffee, unaware that he was the center of the storm that had just upended her life. Hank caught her eye from the grill, raising an eyebrow in question. Judy just shook her head slightly and headed for the staff room. The news would spread quickly enough without her having to say the words. Her locker contained little: a spare hairnet, a cardigan for when the air conditioning blasted too high in summer, a small makeup bag, and the photo of her granddaughter in cap and gown that she'd taped to the inside of the door. It took less than a minute to empty it into her purse. Judy pinned her name tag to the bulletin board, next to the outdated holiday schedule and faded safety posters. 3 years summed up in a plastic rectangle, Judy, server, in simple black letters. When she walked back into the dining room, Hank was already waiting by the counter. His face told her he'd heard. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "Everyone knows it's wrong." "Thanks, Hank," Judy replied, giving his arm a quick squeeze. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Other staff members tried to catch her eye, but Judy couldn't bear their sympathy right now. She headed straight for Mr. Wilson's table. He looked up at her approach, confusion creasing his face. "Everything all right? You look pale." Judy slid into the booth across from him, choosing her words carefully. "I need to let you know that I won't be working here anymore." "What? Why not?" Mr. Wilson set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Just a disagreement about policy," Judy said, trying to keep her voice light. The last thing she wanted was for him to know he was the reason for her firing. "It's been coming for a while." Mr. Wilson wasn't fooled. His eyes, still sharp despite his age, narrowed. "This have anything to do with me?" Before Judy could answer, the bell above the door jingled. A group of teenagers entered, laughing and pushing each other playfully. Kevin emerged from the back, straightening his tie, and moved to greet them. "I should go," Judy said, standing quickly. "You take care of yourself, Mr. Wilson. Don't forget your medication with lunch." Mr. Wilson reached across the table, catching her wrist with surprising strength. "Judy, tell me what happened." She hesitated, then sighed. "They found out about the extra food. The things I've been bringing you. They called it theft." The color drained from Mr. Wilson's face. "They fired you for feeding me?" "It's not your fault," Judy said quickly. "It's a stupid rule, and they're just looking for excuses to cut costs. Please don't feel bad about this." But Mr. Wilson was already struggling to his feet, his face flushed with anger now. "Where's Bill? I need to speak with him right now." "Please don't," Judy begged. "It won't change anything, and I don't want you upset. Your heart. Remember what the doctor said." For a moment it seemed Mr. Wilson might ignore her plea. Then slowly the fight went out of him. He sank back into the booth, suddenly looking every one of his 87 years. "This isn't right," he said, his voice breaking. "You were just being kind." "Kindness doesn't pay the bills," Judy said, trying for a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll be fine. Already have some leads on new jobs." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Jobs weren't easy to come by in Millbrook, especially for a woman in her 50s with no college degree. "I'll talk to Bill," Mr. Wilson insisted. "Make him understand." "Promise me you won't," Judy said firmly. "Promise me you'll keep coming here, having your coffee, taking care of yourself." "That's what I want." Mr. Wilson didn't answer. His jaw set in a stubborn line she recognized all too well. Judy felt someone watching and turned to see Kevin hovering nearby, clearly wanting her to leave without making a scene. She straightened her shoulders and reached into her pocket, feeling the smooth porcelain of the bluebird Mr. Wilson had given her. "I need to go," she said softly. "But thank you for this." She placed her hand over his weathered one briefly. "It means more than you know." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, holding her head high despite the tears threatening to spill. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. Judy stood on the sidewalk for a moment, disoriented. For 3 years, she'd walked through these doors 6 days a week. Now what? Through the window, she could see Mr. Wilson watching her, his expression a mixture of sorrow and indignation. Behind him, life in the cafe continued, customers eating, staff serving, the ordinary rhythm of the day unbroken by her absence. Judy turned away and began walking toward her car, the final paycheck heavy in her pocket. She had bills due next week and barely enough savings to cover a month's expenses. Fear churned in her stomach, but underneath it was something else, a quiet certainty that she'd done the right thing, no matter what it cost her. What she didn't see was Mr. Wilson slowly rising from his booth, leaving his coffee unfinished as he made his way to the door. Nor did she see him pull out his ancient flip phone and dial a number with determined precision, his eyes never leaving her retreating figure. "Jack," he said when the call connected. "It's your old man."
"I need a favor."
A big one. Jack Wilson hadn't expected his father's call. They usually spoke on Sundays, a ritual established after his mother's passing to ensure they stayed connected despite the distance between Millbrook and Fort Myers, where Jack had been stationed for the past 3 years. "Dad, everything okay?" Jack's voice carried the immediate concern of a son who knows an unexpected call rarely brings good news. "Not exactly," Thomas Wilson replied. his voice tight with barely contained anger. Got a situation here I thought you should know about. As Jack listened to his father explain what had happened to Judy, his expression darkened. At 32, Jack Wilson had served 2 tours overseas and now worked as a training officer at the base. He'd seen both the worst and best of humanity, but something about this story struck a particularly raw nerve. She was fired? For feeding you? Jack's voice drew the attention of his office mate, Lieutenant Pete Alvarez, who glanced up from his paperwork. Mr. Wilson didn't mince words as he described Judy's kindness over the past months and the callous way she'd been dismissed. Woman's got a granddaughter in college she helps support. Rent due next week, and they let her go like she was nothing. Jack ran a hand through his close-cropped hair. That's not right, Dad, not right at all. Thought you should know, Mr. Wilson said. You're always talking about how the Corps takes care of its own. Well, this lady took care of one of your own. Thought maybe your boys might have something to say about that. After the call ended, Jack sat staring at the wall, his mind racing. Pete raised an eyebrow. Everything good with your old man? Jack shook his head and recounted the story. With each detail, Pete's expression grew more incredulous. So this waitress was basically looking out for your dad, a Korean War vet, and got canned for it? Pete summarized, his voice rising. That's some seriously messed up priorities. My thoughts exactly, Jack agreed. By lunchtime, the story had spread through their unit. Jack found himself surrounded by fellow Marines in the mess hall, all asking for details. Among them was Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper, whose grandfather had also served in Korea. Your dad still go to the VFW meetings? Cooper asked between bites of sandwich. Jack nodded. Every Wednesday, why? I think your dad should tell his story there. Get the word out to the whole veteran community in Millbrook. Cooper's eyes held a determined gleam that Jack recognized from missions. Sometimes people need a reminder about what matters. The next evening, Mr. Wilson made his way to the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall on the edge of town. The building wasn't much to look at, a converted warehouse with a flagpole out front, but inside, it was a second home to dozens of local veterans. Despite his anger still simmering from the day before, Mr. Wilson almost skipped the meeting. His back ached, and the cold weather made his old injuries flare up. But Jack had called that morning, asking specifically if he was going. Something in his son's voice told him it was important. The meeting followed its usual pattern: announcements, discussion of upcoming events, plans for Veterans Day. Mr. Wilson sat quietly in his usual spot, nursing a cup of weak coffee. When the commander asked if anyone had anything else to share, he found himself slowly raising his hand. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Thomas Wilson wasn't known for speaking up at meetings. Something happened yesterday I think you all should know about, he began, his voice stronger than he expected. He told the story simply, without embellishment, his words carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much injustice in his lifetime to tolerate one more instance. When he finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Frank Martinez, who'd served in Vietnam, spoke up. This Café Sunshine, you said? The one on Main Street? Mr. Wilson nodded. My daughter had her first job there, Frank said, his face darkening. Think I'll be having a word with Bill about how he treats his people. Others joined in, each offering support or expressing outrage. The VFW secretary, Diane Powell, took notes. We should organize something, she suggested. Let the community know how veterans are treated, and those who look out for veterans. By the time Mr. Wilson left the hall, plans were already taking shape. What he didn't know was that 300 miles away, his son was having a similar conversation with his fellow Marines. Jack sat in his living room, beer in hand, surrounded by 3 of his closest comrades. Pete Alvarez, Ryan Cooper, and Mike Daniels had all served alongside him, forming the kind of bond only combat can create. So what's the plan? Mike asked, leaning forward. At 28, he was the youngest of the group, with a reputation for action rather than deliberation. Jack took a swig of his beer. I've got 3 days of leave coming up. Thought I might pay my old man a visit. Convenient timing, Pete remarked with a knowing smile. Thought you 3 might want to tag along, Jack continued. Meet my dad, see the thriving metropolis of Millbrook. He paused. Maybe pay a visit to a certain cafe. Ryan nodded slowly. I think that could be arranged. Been meaning to see more of the heartland anyway. They spent the next hour hashing out details. This wouldn't be just a casual visit. No, if they were going to make a point, they would do it the Marine way, with precision, impact, and unmistakable clarity. Meanwhile, Judy Hayes sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by job applications. 3 days had passed since her termination, and each one had been filled with fruitless job hunting. Millbrook wasn't exactly brimming with employment opportunities, especially not for someone with her specific skill set. The phone rang, interrupting her concentration. It was Hank from the cafe. "Just checking in," he said when she answered. "Wanted to see how you're holding up." "I'm fine," Judy lied, forcing cheer into her voice. "Any news from the cafe?" Hank hesitated. "Place isn't the same without you. Customers keep asking where you are. Bill told everyone you quit for personal reasons." Judy's grip tightened on the phone. "Of course he did." "Mr. Wilson hasn't been back," Hank added. "Kevin seems to think that's a good thing, says we're saving on comp meals." The disgust in his voice was evident. "Anyway, just wanted you to know we miss you. This whole thing stinks." After hanging up, Judy returned to her applications with renewed determination. She couldn't afford to dwell on what had happened. Her granddaughter's tuition installment was due next month, and her own rent wouldn't wait. She was so focused that she almost missed the knock at her door. When she opened it, she found Mr. Wilson standing on her porch, leaning heavily on his cane. "Mr. Wilson, what are you doing here? How did you find my address?" "Small town," he said with a shrug. "Mind if I come in?" "This old leg doesn't stand as long as it used to." Judy stepped aside, embarrassed by the stack of bills visible on her coffee table. Her apartment was modest, a one-bedroom rental with furniture that had seen better days. But it was clean and bright with houseplants on every windowsill. Mr. Wilson settled onto her sofa with a grateful sigh. "Been meaning to stop by. Wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm fine," Judy said automatically, the same lie she'd told Hank. "Can I get you some tea? That would be nice." While Judy busied herself in the kitchen, Mr. Wilson glanced around her living room. Photos of her granddaughter dominated one wall. Rachel through the years, from gap-toothed elementary school smiles to serious high school graduation poses. Beside them hung Rachel's college acceptance letter, framed like the treasure it was. When Judy returned with tea, Mr. Wilson got straight to the point. "My son's coming to town this weekend, bringing some friends from the base." "That's nice," Judy said, unsure why he was telling her this. "Marines, all 4 of them." Mr. Wilson took a sip of tea. "Good boys. The kind who understand about duty and honor." Something in his tone made Judy pause. "Mr. Wilson, what exactly did you tell your son?" "The truth," he said simply. "About a good woman who lost her job for doing the right thing." Judy set down her cup with a sharp clink. "You shouldn't have done that. I don't want anyone making a fuss over this." "Too late," Mr. Wilson replied, not looking the least bit apologetic. "Word's already spread through the VFW too. A lot of unhappy veterans in town right now." Judy felt a flutter of panic. "What are they planning to do?" "Don't rightly know," Mr. Wilson said, though the glint in his eye suggested otherwise. "But if I were Bill Parker, I might be reconsidering some recent decisions." "This isn't necessary," Judy insisted. "I'll find another job. There's no need to make this bigger than it is." Mr. Wilson reached across and patted her hand, his weathered palm warm against her skin. "Some things need to be made bigger, Judy. Some wrongs need to be righted in a way folks won't forget." After he left, Judy sat for a long time, the tea growing cold beside her. Part of her was touched by Mr. Wilson's loyalty, but another part dreaded what might come of it. The last thing she needed was to become the center of a controversy in this small town. What she didn't know was that 50 miles away, 4 Marines in dress uniforms were already packing their bags, preparing for a weekend mission unlike any they'd undertaken before. And in the VFW hall, a dozen veterans were crafting carefully worded letters to the local newspaper about honor, community, and the treatment of those who serve. The wheels were in motion, and Sunshine Café was about to face a storm it never saw coming. Saturday morning brought the kind of crisp, clear autumn day that normally would have put a smile on Bill Parker's face. Sunshine Café was bustling, the weekend crowd filling nearly every table. The bell above the door jingled constantly as customers came and went, the scent of fresh coffee and bacon hanging in the air. Bill stood behind the counter, filling in for Judy's usual position. Finding a replacement hadn't been as easy as he'd expected. 2 potential hires had backed out at the last minute without explanation. He'd been forced to take on extra shifts himself. stretching himself thin between managing the books and covering the floor. "Order up," Hank called from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates onto the pass-through window. His tone lacked its usual cheer. In fact, the entire staff had been oddly reserved since Judy's departure. Conversation stopped when Bill entered the break room. Smiles seemed forced. Kevin appeared at Bill's elbow. "Table 6 needs more coffee," he said, not meeting his boss's eyes. He'd been quieter too, though Bill suspected it was more guilt than protest. The morning rush was reaching its peak when the bell chimed again. Bill glanced up automatically, then froze at the sight of 4 men in full Marine dress uniforms entering the cafe. Their appearance immediately commanded attention, conversations faltering as heads turned. Leading the group was a man Bill recognized immediately as Jack Wilson. The resemblance to his father was unmistakable. The same sharp blue eyes, the same set of the jaw. The 3 Marines flanking him were similarly imposing, their uniforms immaculate, faces serious. Every customer in the cafe seemed to hold their breath as the 4 Marines surveyed the room. Then, as if following a silent command, they made their way toward the back booth, Mr. Wilson's regular spot. The old veteran was already there, waiting. When he saw his son and the others, he attempted to stand, but Jack gestured for him to remain seated. Instead, the 4 Marines stood at attention beside the booth, creating an island of military precision amid the casual breakfast crowd. "Dad?" Jack said with a nod of greeting. "Good to see you." "You too, son," Mr. Wilson replied, his eyes bright with what might have been pride or possibly unshed tears. "These the boys you told me about?" Jack introduced his companions. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper, Lieutenant Pete Alvarez, and Corporal Mike Daniels. Each Marine nodded respectfully to the older veteran. "Sir," they said in unison. By now the entire cafe had gone quiet. Even the clatter from the kitchen had ceased as Hank and the other staff peered through the service window. Bill stood frozen behind the counter, a coffee pot clutched in his suddenly sweaty hand. Jack turned, scanning the room until his eyes locked on Bill. "Would the owner of this establishment be available to speak with us?" Bill swallowed hard, set down the coffee pot with a trembling hand, and stepped forward. "That's me, Bill Parker." Jack nodded to his fellow Marines who remained at parade rest beside Mr. Wilson's booth while Jack approached the counter. Despite his civilian status, Bill found himself standing straighter, almost at attention. "Mr. Parker," Jack said, his voice carrying in the silent cafe, "I understand you recently terminated an employee named Judy Hayes. I'd like to discuss the circumstances of that decision." Bill felt his face grow hot. "That's a private business matter, son. Not something I'm comfortable discussing with all due respect." "Sir?" Jack interrupted, his tone making it clear just how little respect he felt was due. "When that business matter involves the mistreatment of someone who looked after a veteran, my father, it becomes my concern." From the corner of his eye, Bill saw Kevin edging toward the office, clearly hoping to escape the confrontation. But Pete Alvarez shifted slightly, blocking his path with a polite but firm shake of his head. "I understand your concern," Bill said, lowering his voice, "but there were policies violated. Inventory missing. I run a business, not a charity." Jack's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "I see. And these policies, they're worth more than basic human decency? Worth more than making sure an 87-year-old man who fought for this country doesn't go hungry?" The words hung in the air, sharp as knives. Bill heard someone at a nearby table mutter, "Shame." Another customer, a woman he recognized as a regular Tuesday breakfast client, gathered her purse and walked out without finishing her meal. "Look," Bill said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I had to make a tough call. The cafe's been struggling. Every dollar counts." "Speaking of dollars," Jack said, reaching into his uniform pocket. He withdrew an envelope and placed it on the counter. "Inside you'll find 187.42s, the exact amount you deducted from Judy's final paycheck. We thought you might want to reconsider that decision." Before Bill could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. Judy Hayes stepped into the cafe, stopping short at the sight before her. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her hair neatly styled, as if she'd dressed with care for this moment. "Judy," Bill breathed, a mixture of surprise and discomfort crossing his face. Mr. Wilson had called her that morning, asking her to meet him at the cafe. He hadn't mentioned anything about Marines or confrontations. For a moment she considered turning around and leaving, but the sight of Mr. Wilson's proud smile from his booth kept her rooted to the spot. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Jack turned to her, his stern expression softening. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Jack Wilson, Thomas's son." He gestured to his companions. "My fellow Marines and I wanted to personally thank you for looking after my father." Mike stepped forward, holding another envelope. "We took up a collection at the base. It's not much, but we wanted you to know that Marines look after those who look after our own." Judy's eyes widened as Mike placed the envelope in her hands. She opened it to find several $100s in cash, along with a card signed by dozens of people she'd never met. "I can't accept this," she protested. "You can and you will," Mr. Wilson said firmly from his booth. "Consider it back pay for services rendered." The cafe had grown even more crowded while they'd been talking. Bill noticed with alarm that several members of the VFW had arrived, many wearing caps or jackets that proudly displayed their service insignia. They filled the remaining tables and lined the walls, their presence a silent statement of solidarity. Frank Martinez stepped forward from the group of veterans. "Bill, I think you should know that Sunshine Café has been the preferred breakfast spot for our VFW meetings for nearly a decade. That accounts for a lot of business. Business that could easily go elsewhere." Bill's face paled as the implication sank in. "Additionally," Frank continued, "we've drafted a letter to the Millbrook Gazette explaining the situation. We'd prefer not to mail it." Ryan Cooper, still standing at parade rest near Mr. Wilson, spoke up.
Sir, if I may?
"I believe what these gentlemen are suggesting is that you have an opportunity to correct a mistake." The cafe had become so crowded that new customers were being turned away at the door. Among those trying to peer in was Ted Johnson, editor of the Millbrook Gazette, who'd received an anonymous tip about something big happening at Sunshine Café that morning. Bill looked around at the faces watching him. The stern Marines, the proud veterans, his uncomfortable staff, and the curious customers. Then his eyes fell on Judy, who stood with quiet dignity despite everything that had happened. Something inside Bill crumbled. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the facade of corporate policy he'd been hiding behind. Whatever it was, its absence left room for something else, something that felt surprisingly like relief. "Judy," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I made a mistake. I'd like to offer you your job back. Full benefits, no penalty, and—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "A raise. You're the heart of this place. Always have been." A murmur ran through the crowd. Judy looked stunned, her eyes darting from Bill to Mr. Wilson to Jack. "Take your time deciding," Bill added quickly. "The position is yours whenever, if ever, you want it." Jack stepped closer to Bill, his voice low but firm. "That's a start. But I think there's more to be done here." Bill nodded, understanding. He cleared his throat and raised his voice to address the entire cafe. "Starting today, Sunshine Café is implementing a new program. Veterans eat at half price always. And—" he glanced at Kevin, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Staff will have discretion to provide complimentary meals to anyone in need. No questions asked, no penalties." A cheer went up from the crowd. Mr. Wilson beamed from his booth, looking more energetic than he had in months. Judy stood still, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Part of her wanted to refuse Bill's offer out of pride, but another part, the practical side that worried about Bill's and her granddaughter's tuition, recognized the olive branch for what it was. Jack approached her, speaking quietly. "My father told me everything you did for him. Not just the food, but the company. The dignity." He glanced back at the old veteran. "It meant more than you know." "He's a good man," Judy said simply. "I just did what anyone would do." "But they didn't," Jack pointed out. "You did." The next hour passed in a blur. The 4 Marines joined Mr. Wilson for breakfast with Judy, not yet back on staff but unable to resist the familiar rhythm, pouring coffee for the entire group. Veterans shared stories across tables. Ted Johnson scribbled notes for what would become a front-page story about community, respect and standing up for what's right. By lunchtime, a new sign hung in Sunshine Café's window, "Proud supporter of our veterans," and below it, in smaller letters, "Ask about our veterans meal program," coordinated by Judy Hayes. As the crowd finally began to thin, Jack and his fellow Marines prepared to leave. They stood at attention beside Mr. Wilson's booth one last time. offering perfect salutes to the old veteran. Mission accomplished. Sir, Jack said with the hint of a smile. Mr. Wilson returned the salute as best he could with his arthritic shoulder. Well done, boys. Your country thanks you. Judy watched from behind the counter, the porcelain bluebird now sitting proudly beside the register. She'd accepted Bill's offer, with a few conditions of her own, and would start again on Monday. As the Marines filed out, each nodding respectfully to her as they passed, she felt something that had been knotted inside her finally loosen. Sometimes, she reflected, justice comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes it wears a uniform, and sometimes it begins with nothing more complicated than a simple act of kindness, the kind that changes not just one life, but an entire community.